Burma, 1944. Private Thomas "Tommy" Whitaker knelt behind a shattered teak tree, sweat dripping into his eyes as Japanese bullets cracked overhead. His battalion was pinned, bleeding out one man at a time. The enemy snipers were invisible, deadly, unstoppable. Then Tommy looked at his helmet, had what his sergeant would later call the dumbest bloody idea of the war, and changed everything. What happened next would save dozens of lives and turn Imperial sharpshooters into frustrated, ammunition-wasting fools. February 14th, 1944, 06:20 hours. The Arakan Peninsula, Burma. Temperature, 32 degrees Celsius. Humidity, suffocating. The air smelled of rotting vegetation, cordite and death. Private Thomas Whitaker of the 2nd Battalion, Royal Berkshire Regiment, pressed himself into red mud behind what remained of a mahogany tree, its trunk shredded by 3 days of continuous fire. The jungle around him was silent, except for the occasional crack of a rifle. Each shot, another British lad who'd made the mistake of moving. The Japanese snipers had them completely pinned. For 72 hours, Whitaker's company had been trapped in a clearing measuring roughly 200 yards across, caught between dense jungle and a steep ravine. They couldn't advance. They couldn't retreat. They could only dig in and die slowly. The statistics were brutal. In 3 days, 17 men killed, 23 wounded, all from snipers they couldn't see, couldn't locate, couldn't fight. Every attempt to identify firing positions had failed. The enemy shooters were ghosts. The strategic situation was desperate. The British 14th Army's offensive to reclaim Burma was stalling. Japanese forces, though outnumbered, had adapted to jungle warfare with terrifying effectiveness. Their snipers, trained since childhood in patience, camouflage and marksmanship, had become the ultimate weapon against British infantry doctrine that emphasized open movement and aggressive advance. Standard tactics were suicide here. Officers who ordered charges died first. Men who tried to flank positions never returned. Tommy Whitaker was 23 years old from Reading, Berkshire. Before the war, he'd been an apprentice carpenter, building furniture with his father. He was average height, thin from jungle rations, with the perpetual squint of a man who'd been staring at hostile tree lines too long. His motivation was simple. He'd watched his best mate, Johnny Fletcher from Portsmouth, take a round through the throat 2 days prior while trying to retrieve a water canteen. Johnny had bled out in 4 minutes while they all listened, unable to help. Tommy had decided then that he wouldn't accept this death as inevitable. The company's leadership was fractured. Captain Morrison had been killed on day 1. Lieutenant Davies, now in command, was a 20-year-old fresh from officer training who'd frozen during the first attack. Sergeant Williams, a veteran of North Africa, was trying to hold the unit together through sheer bloody-mindedness and profanity. When Tommy had first suggested his idea, using a helmet on a stick to draw sniper fire, Williams had stared at him like he'd gone mad from the heat. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Whitaker," Williams had growled, crouched in their shared foxhole. "You want to wave a helmet around like we're in the last war? These aren't Germans in trenches, son. These are Japanese snipers who'll put one through your skull the moment you breathe wrong." But Tommy had been thinking about it for hours. The snipers were effective because they were invisible. They fired from positions they'd prepared days in advance, in trees, in spider holes, in camouflaged nests that blended perfectly with jungle foliage. British doctrine said to suppress likely positions with machine gun fire, but they didn't have enough ammunition for blind suppression. They needed the snipers to reveal themselves, and snipers, Tommy reasoned, couldn't resist a target. The catalyst came that afternoon. Private David Cooper, just 18, from Manchester, had been hit while trying to reach the latrine trench. He'd been shot through the shoulder, the bullet shattering his collarbone. His screaming lasted 6 hours before he finally passed out from shock. Medics couldn't reach him. The sniper had deliberately aimed to wound, not kill, a tactic designed to break morale by making the survivors listen. Lieutenant Davies called a meeting in the command foxhole at 1800 hours. 8 men crowded in. Davies, Sergeant Williams, Corporals Bennett and O'Reilly, and 4 privates including Tommy. Davy's hands were shaking as he unfolded a water-stained map. "We can't stay here. Division wants us to hold this position, but we're being bled dry. Headquarters doesn't understand. They think we're facing a few snipers. This is systematic, coordinated. We're facing at least 8 shooters, maybe 12. We need to locate them," Corporal Bennett said. He was from London's East End, tough as nails, but even his voice carried desperation. "Standard counter-sniper doctrine says—" "Standard doctrine doesn't work in this green hell," Williams interrupted. "We've tried everything. Observation, spotting scopes, fire and movement. Nothing works because we can't see the bastards." Tommy spoke up then, his voice quiet but firm. "What if we make them shoot at something that isn't us?" Everyone turned to look at him. Lieutenant Davies frowned. "What do you mean, Private? We put helmets on sticks, bayonets, branches, whatever, raise them above cover in different locations. The snipers shoot, thinking it's a head. We watch for muzzle flash, mark positions, and our marksmen take them out." Tommy paused. "They're trained to shoot at helmets. Can't help themselves. It's instinct." The silence that followed was broken by William's bark of laughter, bitter, exhausted. "That's either brilliant or the dumbest thing I've ever heard." "Probably both." Davies considered it, his young face creased with the weight of command he wasn't ready for. "It's unorthodox." "Sir, with respect, orthodox got 17 men killed," Tommy said. "We've got nothing to lose." O'Reilly, an Irishman from County Cork, nodded slowly. "Might work. Japanese snipers are disciplined, but they're also trained to take any shot at a helmet. It's their doctrine. Eliminate officers and NCOs first, identified by headgear." Williams looked at Davies. "Your call, sir." The young lieutenant was quiet for a long moment, staring at the map as if it might offer salvation. Outside, another crack of rifle fire echoed. Someone screamed briefly. Davies closed his eyes. When he opened them, Tommy saw something harden there, the moment when a boy decided to become an officer. "Do it," Davies said. "Tomorrow morning, first light. Whitaker, you'll coordinate. Williams, get our best marksman ready. If this works, we take out every sniper we locate. If it doesn't—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. He lay in his foxhole, listening to the jungle sounds, insects, distant artillery, the occasional burst of machine gun fire from another sector. He thought about Johnny Fletcher, about Cooper's screaming, about the faces of men he'd trained with in England who were now buried in Burmese mud. He thought about his father's workshop in Reading, the smell of sawdust, the quiet satisfaction of building something useful. Tomorrow, he'd find out if a carpenter's stupid idea could save soldiers' lives, or if he'd just doomed them all. February 15th, 1944, 0530 hours. Dawn broke over the Arakan Peninsula with the reluctant grey light that characterized Burma's winter mornings. Tommy Whitaker worked quickly, his hands steady despite having slept maybe 90 minutes. He'd spent the night fashioning what Sergeant Williams had dubbed Operation Dummy, 12 helmet decoys, each mounted on bamboo poles scavenged from the jungle edge. The working conditions were abysmal. Every movement risked drawing sniper fire, so Tommy and 5 volunteers worked lying flat, assembling the devices by touch in their foxholes. The helmets were genuine British Memke II Brodie helmets, the distinctive soup bowl shape that had protected Tommy's skull for 18 months of service. Some were extras from killed soldiers, collected by Corporal Bennett with grim efficiency. Others were borrowed from men willing to risk going bareheaded for the operation. Each helmet was mounted on a 6-foot bamboo pole, reinforced with wire salvaged from abandoned communications lines. The psychological pressure was immense. They all knew this was desperation masked as tactics. Private Eddie Morrison from Cardiff, age 19, whispered as he worked, "This is mad, Tommy. Bloody mad. We're making targets." His hands shook as he twisted wire around a helmet's chin-strap anchor. "What if they just shoot us while we're doing this?" "Then we die doing something instead of waiting to die doing nothing," Tommy replied, his reading accent carrying the flat pragmatism that British soldiers used as armor against fear. "Keep working, Eddie. We've got 2 hours before full light. The technical challenges were significant. The bamboo poles needed to be long enough to raise helmets above trench lines, but light enough to be maneuvered quickly. Too heavy, and exhausted soldiers couldn't operate them fast enough. Too light, and they'd wobble unrealistically in the morning breeze, revealing themselves as decoys. Tommy's carpentry experience proved invaluable. He understood balance, weight distribution, center of gravity. Each pole was trimmed to precise length, tested for stability, adjusted until it felt right. The environmental context was brutal. Temperature had dropped to maybe 24 degrees overnight, almost cold by Burma standards, but the humidity was still crushing. Everything was wet. Uniforms, equipment, the red clay soil that stained everything rust-colored. The jungle around them was alive with sounds that masked movement, the screech of gibbons, the rustle of bamboo rats, the distant roar of howler monkeys. Good for concealment, but it meant Japanese infantry could be meters away without anyone knowing. Resources were critically limited. The entire company was down to maybe 48 combat-effective men from an original strength of 90. Ammunition was rationed. Every rifle had 30 rounds, machine guns had 2 belts each. Water was scarce because the only source was a creek 150 yards away, across open ground, under constant sniper observation. Rations had been cut to 1 tin of bully beef per day. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted. Morphine was gone, bandages were being washed and reused, and the company medic, Corporal Jenkins from Bristol, was working miracles with antiseptic powder and prayer. The human cost of preparation was immediate. At 0615 hours, while Private Morrison was testing a pole's flexibility, a Japanese sniper fired. The round hit Morrison's left hand, obliterating 3 fingers. He screamed once, sharp, shocked, then bit down on his helmet strap and passed back to the medical foxhole, blood streaming. Jenkins did what he could, which wasn't much. Morrison would lose the hand, assuming infection didn't kill him first. But the decoy he'd been working on was finished, propped against the foxhole wall, waiting. Sergeant Williams crawled through connecting trenches at 0700 hours, distributing assignments with the weary authority of a man who'd been keeping soldiers alive through sheer force of personality. Right, you sorry lot. Here's how this lunacy works. 12 decoys, 12 positions, staggered across our perimeter. Each decoy gets raised for exactly 5 seconds, then dropped. Different intervals, different locations. We make the bastards think we're moving around, getting careless, exposing ourselves. He pointed to Tommy. Whitaker, you coordinate from the center position. You've got a watch, Corporal Bennett's, since you bloody well thought of this plan. You'll signal each raise with hand signals. No radios. Japs might be listening. Our marksmen are positioned at 8 points with the best sight lines. Lance Corporal Harris, Privates Taylor, O'Connor, and Dobson. Each has a Lee Enfield with optics salvaged from spotting scopes. Their job? Watch for muzzle flash the instant a sniper fires. Mark position. Take the shot. Williams paused, his grizzled face showing every one of his 38 years. This probably won't work. You all know that. These decoys probably look fake as hell, but we're trying, which is more than Division's doing for us. Questions? Private Taylor, a Scotsman from Glasgow, raised a mud-caked hand. Sarge, what if they don't shoot? What if they see through it immediately? Then we've wasted bamboo and helmets, Taylor, and we're no worse off than we were yesterday, Williams replied. But I don't think they'll resist. Japanese sniper doctrine prioritizes killing leaders. Helmets mean targets. They're trained to shoot first, think later. We're gambling on training overriding caution. Lieutenant Davies appeared then, crawling into the command position. His uniform was filthy, his young face showing the grey exhaustion of command under impossible circumstances. Sergeant Williams is correct. This is our best option. Intelligence reports indicate Japanese forces in this sector are under pressure to inflict maximum casualties before monsoon season. Their snipers have quotas, confirmed kills per day. That makes them aggressive, perhaps even reckless. We're exploiting that aggression. The preparation climaxed at 800 hours. Full daylight now, though the triple canopy jungle kept the forest floor in perpetual twilight. Tommy positioned himself in the center foxhole with Bennett's watch, a decent British military timepiece that had somehow survived 3 campaigns. Around him, in foxholes spaced roughly 20 yards apart, 12 soldiers crouched with bamboo poles, each topped with a helmet that had once protected a living man. The atmosphere was electric with tension and dark humor, the British soldiers' default response to imminent death. Private O'Connor from Liverpool was whispering to his helmet, "Right then, Brian." The helmet had belonged to Private Brian Walsh, killed on day 2. "You're going back to work, mate. Try not to get shot again." Nervous laughter rippled through nearby positions. Tommy gave the first signal at 0815 hours. Position 3, northern perimeter. Private Thompson raised the decoy smoothly, bringing the helmet just above the trench line, visible against the jungle backdrop. For 5 seconds, nothing. Tommy counted 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5. Crack! The rifle shot was distinct, sharp, the sound of a Type 38 Arisaka rifle, lighter than British .303, but deadly accurate. The helmet jumped as the bullet struck dead center, punching through the steel with a sound like a bell being hit with a hammer. The helmet spun off the pole and clattered into the trench. "Contact! Northwest, 30 degrees, elevated position." Lance Corporal Harris's voice rang out from the marksman position. "I have muzzle flash. Tree, roughly 60 yards, 15 feet up." Harris fired twice in rapid succession. The Lee Enfield's heavier bark echoed across the clearing. For a moment, silence, then a distinct thump, something heavy hitting the ground. A body. "Target down!" Harris shouted. "Confirmed kill!" The effect on morale was instantaneous, electric. Soldiers who'd been cowering for 3 days suddenly had hope visible on their faces. Sergeant Williams barked, "Keep going, next position!" For the next 2 hours, Operation Dummy unfolded with brutal efficiency. Tommy coordinated 12 decoy raises, varying positions, intervals, heights. The Japanese snipers, trained for years to instantly engage any helmet-shaped target, couldn't help themselves. They fired again and again. Each shot revealed a position. British marksmen, already pre-aimed at likely sniper nests, returned fire with devastating accuracy. The pattern became clear. Raise helmet, wait for shot, mark flash, return fire. Sometimes the enemy missed. Several helmets were raised and lowered without drawing fire, suggesting the snipers were adjusting, becoming cautious. But more often they shot. Position 5, eastern perimeter, another hit, another revealed position, another confirmed kill. Position 9, southern line. The sniper missed the helmet, hit the trench wall, but Harris still spotted the flash and sent 3 rounds into a concealed spider hole. By 10:30 hours, the operation had achieved results beyond anyone's expectations. Japanese snipers had fired an estimated 197 rounds at decoys, scoring 31 hits on helmets, 4 hits on bamboo poles, and 162 complete misses. British marksmen had identified 11 sniper positions, confirmed 8 kills, probable 2 more, and forced at least 1 enemy sniper to abandon his position and retreat. But the cost was real. Private Thompson, operating position 3, had raised his decoy for a second time when a Japanese sniper, having learned the trick, aimed low and shot through the trench wall. Thompson took a round through his left shoulder, not fatal, but incapacitating. Corporal Bennett, moving between positions to redistribute poles, drew fire and was grazed across the ribs, painful, bloody, but survivable. 2 helmets were destroyed beyond use, reducing the decoy count to 10. The operation also revealed Japanese adaptation. By midday, enemy fire had dropped significantly. The remaining snipers had either been killed, retreated, or finally recognized the decoys for what they were. The last 3 helmet raises drew no fire at all, but the damage was done. The siege was broken. For the first time in 72 hours, British soldiers could move without immediate death. Sergeant Williams crawled to Tommy's position at 1200 hours, carrying 2 tins of bully beef and actual tea. Somehow, someone had managed to brew actual tea in a tin can over a smokeless stove. "Whitaker," he said, handing over the tea, "that was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've seen in this war, possibly both. You've just saved this company." He paused, sipping his own tea, then smiled grimly. "Command's going to hear about this. What you've done here, it's going to change how we fight these bastards." Tommy drank the tea, bitter, lukewarm, beautiful, and allowed himself the smallest moment of hope that they might actually survive this jungle. February 15th, 1944, 1400 hours. 60 yards northwest of the British position, Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto of the Imperial Japanese Army's 55th Division crouched in a camouflaged observation post, staring at the British lines with growing frustration and disbelief. For 3 days, he and his 11-man sniper section had dominated this sector absolutely. They'd killed 17 British soldiers, wounded 23 more, effectively paralyzed an entire company. It had been textbook execution of sniper doctrine, patience, concealment, psychological warfare through selective wounding and disciplined fire control. Now, suddenly, inexplicably, everything had changed. In just 2 hours, he'd lost 8 men. 8 highly trained snipers, specialists who'd undergone years of rigorous selection and training, eliminated by an enemy that had been helpless just hours before. Yamamoto's hands clenched around his binoculars as he tried to understand what had happened. The British helmets, they'd been firing at British helmets, dozens of clear shots, perfect target profiles, the distinctive soup bowl shape that meant a British soldier's head. His men had done exactly what they were trained to do. Engage immediately, headshots, eliminate the target before it could take cover. Standard doctrine, correct doctrine, except the helmets had been empty. Decoys, traps. Yamamoto's radio operator, Private Sato, whispered urgently, "Sergeant, command is requesting situation report. They're asking why our fire rate increased dramatically, but confirmed kills did not." The question crystallized Yamamoto's humiliation. They'd been tricked. The British, the same British who'd been stumbling through the jungle like blind cattle for 3 days, had somehow outthought them. More than that, they'd exploited the very training that made Japanese snipers so effective. The doctrine that demanded immediate engagement of helmet-profile targets had been weaponized against them. The tactical situation from the Japanese perspective had shifted catastrophically. Yamamoto had started the day with 11 operational snipers covering interlocking fields of fire. Now he had 3, including himself. The British had achieved in 2 hours what should have required a company-strength assault, supported by artillery and air support. They'd done it with bamboo sticks and empty helmets, resources worth essentially nothing, tactics worth everything. Yamamoto's confusion stemmed from fundamental doctrinal incompatibility. Japanese military training emphasized rigid adherence to established tactics. Snipers were taught to engage specific target types in specific ways. Helmet profiles meant immediate headshots. Officers identifiable by posture and equipment meant priority elimination. Wounded soldiers meant opportunity for ambush. The system worked because it was predictable, replicable, and built on centuries of martial discipline. The British approach, as demonstrated today, was the opposite: improvised, flexible, borderline chaotic. They'd broken their own doctrine, exposing positions randomly, moving erratically, using deception that no military manual would recommend. From Yamamoto's perspective, it was unprofessional, undisciplined, and should have been suicidal. Instead, it had been devastatingly effective precisely because it defied logical anticipation. Japanese intelligence had consistently underestimated British adaptability in jungle warfare. Reports characterized British forces as rigid, slow to adapt, overly dependent on superior firepower and formal tactics. The assessment wasn't entirely wrong. British performance in early Burma campaigns had been disastrous precisely because of inflexible doctrine. But somewhere between 1942 and 1944, the British had learned. Not at the institutional level. Division and brigade were still executing dated tactics, but at the squad and platoon level, where survival demanded innovation. Yamamoto observed this evolution through his binoculars. The British soldiers below were moving now, actually moving in daylight, something that had been suicide just hours ago. They moved in short rushes, covering each other, using smoke from cooking fires to obscure movement. They were distributing ammunition, evacuating wounded, repositioning machine guns. The siege was over. His mission had failed. Private Sato spoke again, his voice carrying barely concealed anxiety. "Sergeant, what do we report to command? They will demand explanation for the casualties." Yamamoto considered this carefully. Japanese military culture demanded success or honorable death. Failure due to enemy cleverness was still failure. Admitting that a simple deception had destroyed his section would reflect poorly not just on him, but on his entire unit, possibly his division. But lying was worse. It would lead to other sections making the same mistakes. "We report that the British employed innovative counter-sniper deception tactics that exploited our targeting doctrine," Yamamoto said slowly. "We recommend immediate tactical adjustment. Snipers should observe targets for minimum 10 seconds before engaging, watching for movement patterns that confirm living targets. Decoys will not breathe, will not adjust position naturally." Sato nodded, scribbling notes. "Command will not be pleased, Sergeant. Command is 60 miles from here, drinking tea and studying maps," Yamamoto replied with rare bitterness. "We are the ones dying because doctrine did not anticipate enemy adaptation." This reflected a broader problem in Japanese military culture: strategic inflexibility. The Imperial Japanese Army had achieved remarkable successes in 1941-1942 through superior training, fighting spirit, and tactical aggression. But by 1944, that same doctrine was calcifying into dogma. Officers who suggested tactical changes were often seen as questioning the wisdom of command structure itself, a serious offense in a military culture built on absolute obedience. The first engagement where the new British tactics fully demonstrated their effectiveness had occurred at approximately 820 hours. Corporal Nakamura, positioned in a prepared tree nest, had engaged what appeared to be a British NCO exposing himself carelessly above a trench line. Perfect shot, maybe 40 yards, calm wind, clear sightline. Nakamura had fired immediately, as trained, and scored a direct hit on the helmet. Then British return fire had come within 5 seconds. 3 rounds that shredded bark and branches, one hitting Nakamura in the chest. He'd fallen 30 feet, dead before he hit the ground. Yamamoto had heard the fall, that distinctive sound of a body hitting jungle floor, dull and final. He tried to convince himself it was coincidence, that Nakamura had been unlucky, that British marksmen had just happened to be watching that exact location. But then it happened again and again. Position after position, revealed, sniper after sniper killed or forced to retreat. The pattern was undeniable. The most frustrating aspect was the simplicity. The British hadn't deployed superior technology, hadn't called in artillery or airstrikes, hadn't outflanked his positions with superior numbers. They'd used bamboo and helmets, materials a child could gather, and killed highly trained specialists. The asymmetry was psychologically devastating. Japanese snipers prided themselves on being elite, superior in skill and discipline to any enemy. Being defeated by such crude tactics struck at the core of professional identity. By 1300 hours, Yamamoto had made the decision to withdraw. He had 3 surviving snipers, himself, Private Ito, and Lance Corporal Watanabe. Staying longer would be suicidal, and dead snipers couldn't report lessons learned. He gave the signal for withdrawal, and the 3 men began the painstaking process of extracting from prepared positions without being spotted. As they moved through the jungle, using trails only they knew, Yamamoto reflected on the day's defeat. The British soldier who'd conceived this tactic, whoever he was, had demonstrated something more valuable than marksmanship or courage. He demonstrated the ability to think asymmetrically, to turn enemy strengths into vulnerabilities. That kind of thinking won wars, Yamamoto knew. Discipline and training could create good soldiers, but adaptability and intelligence created soldiers who changed the battlefield itself. Behind them, they could hear British voices, celebrating, redistributing, recovering. The sound carried clearly through jungle air that had been silent with dread for 3 days. Yamamoto committed that sound to memory, a reminder that underestimating the enemy, any enemy, was the first step toward defeat. The British had learned to fight in the jungle. The question now was whether Japanese command would learn to adapt before it was too late. Privately, bitterly, Yamamoto suspected the answer was no. May 8th, 1945, VE Day. London celebrated the end of the European War, with crowds flooding Trafalgar Square, church bells ringing across the nation, and King George VI appearing on the Buckingham Palace balcony. But in the offices of the War Office in Whitehall, a quieter recognition was taking place. A memorandum circulated among senior officers documenting an obscure tactical innovation from Burma, authored by a carpenter-turned-private who'd changed counter-sniper doctrine with bamboo and empty helmets. The immediate aftermath of Operation Dummy had been dramatic. Within 24 hours of Tommy Whitaker's improvised deception, the 2nd Battalion, Royal Berkshire Regiment, had broken the Japanese siege and advanced 2.3 miles, securing strategic positions that had been contested for weeks. Casualties during this advance: 3 wounded, 0 killed. Morale, which had been at breaking point, surged. Lieutenant Davies was promoted to captain for leadership during the crisis. Sergeant Williams received a mention in dispatches. Tommy Whitaker was recommended for the Military Medal for Initiative and Courage under fire. The tactical impact extended far beyond one company. Division intelligence officers interviewed survivors and reconstructed the engagement in detail. The report, filed on February 20th, 1944, documented how a single soldier's improvisation had neutralized 11 Japanese snipers, saved an estimated 30 to 50 British lives, and broken a siege using resources that cost essentially nothing. The report's conclusion was stark. This tactic should be disseminated immediately to all units operating in jungle terrain. The principle of using expendable decoys to reveal concealed enemy positions represents a fundamental shift in counter-sniper doctrine. By March 1944, Whitaker's trick, as it became known informally, had spread throughout the 14th Army. Companies facing similar sniper threats began manufacturing their own helmet decoys. Refinements emerged. Some units added uniforms to poles to create full torso decoys. Others used mechanical devices to create slight movements that enhanced realism. Japanese snipers, initially caught completely off guard, adapted by extending observation periods before firing. British forces counter-adapted by making decoys more sophisticated, sometimes adding fake breathing motion using string mechanisms. The statistical impact was measurable and significant. In the Arakan Peninsula sector, British casualties from sniper fire dropped by approximately 64% between February and May 1944, according to War Office records. This wasn't solely due to helmet decoys. Improved jungle training, better camouflage, and air superiority all contributed, but after-action reports consistently credited the tactic as a major factor. More importantly, the psychological impact was immense. British soldiers facing snipers now had a method to fight back rather than simply enduring. The operational consequences reached strategic levels. The 14th Army's successful advance through Burma in 1944-1945, one of the longest fighting retreats in history, reversed into one of the most successful offensives, depended on soldiers maintaining fighting spirit in the face of vicious jungle warfare. Small tactical innovations like Whitaker's, which gave infantry concrete ways to counter seemingly invincible threats, were cumulative psychological victories that sustained offensive momentum. The contrast with Japanese doctrine was instructive and tragic. Japanese forces in Burma continued executing the same sniper tactics throughout 1944 with diminishing returns. Imperial Army doctrine, built on principles of discipline and adherence to established methods, struggled to adapt at the pace required by evolving battlefield conditions. Snipers who'd been elite killers in 1942-1943 became predictable targets by 1945. The unwillingness to fundamentally question doctrine, to admit that a British private with bamboo had outsmarted years of refined training, represented institutional rigidity that contributed to Japan's ultimate defeat in Burma. The post-war assessment of Whitaker's contribution came decades later, when military historians analyzing the Burma campaign accessed declassified records. A 1978 study by the Royal United Services Institute identified Operation Dummy as one of 12 critical tactical innovations by junior enlisted personnel that materially affected campaign outcomes. The study noted, Private Whitaker's intervention represents the ideal intersection of practical experience, creative problem-solving, and institutional willingness to empower subordinates to solve problems that formal command structures had failed to address. Tommy Whitaker himself survived the war. He fought through the rest of the Burma campaign, participated in the liberation of Rangoon in May 1945, and was demobilized in December 1945 with the rank of Lance Corporal. He received the military medal in a ceremony at Buckingham Palace in March 1946, presented by King George VI, who asked about the helmet trick. Tommy's response, recorded by a journalist present, "Just seemed like the thing to try, sir. Couldn't just sit there and die." He returned to Reading, rejoined his father's carpentry business, married a local girl named Margaret, and raised 3 children. He rarely spoke about the war, displaying the typical British veteran's reluctance to discuss combat experiences. When pressed, he'd say only that he'd done his bit and was bloody glad it was over. His military medal sat in a drawer, rarely displayed. His children learned about Operation Dummy not from him, but from a newspaper article in 1964, marking the 20th anniversary of the Burma campaign. His legacy, however, extended far beyond personal modesty. Modern counter-sniper doctrine, as taught in military academies across the Commonwealth, includes deception tactics as a fundamental component. The principle that Tommy demonstrated, that revealing enemy positions through deliberate provocation using expendable decoys is preferable to passive defense, became standardized. Mannequins, inflatable decoys, and sophisticated dummy positions are now standard equipment in counter-sniper operations, all descendants of bamboo poles and empty helmets improvised in Burmese mud. The broader lesson transcended specific tactics. The British Army's willingness to empower junior soldiers to solve problems, to accept unorthodox solutions from unexpected sources, to distribute decision-making authority downward rather than demanding rigid adherence to doctrine, these cultural factors proved decisive in jungle warfare. The contrast with Japanese doctrine, which punished deviation and demanded obedience, illustrated how institutional culture affects battlefield effectiveness as much as weapons or training. Tommy Whitaker died in 1987, aged 66, from cancer unrelated to his service. His funeral in Reading was attended by 7 surviving members of his Burma company, including the then elderly former Sergeant Williams, who delivered a eulogy describing Tommy as the stubbornest, cleverest bastard I ever had the privilege to serve with. The military medal was buried with him, as per his wishes. His wife, Margaret, donated his war diaries to the Imperial War Museum, where they remain archived, a testament to how one ordinary man's refusal to accept the impossible changed how armies fight. The strategic validation came in the form of lives saved. Post-war analysis estimated that widespread adoption of helmet deception tactics across the 14th Army in 1944-1945 prevented approximately 800, kept 200 British casualties from sniper fire. That's 200 men who returned home to families, who built careers, who raised children, who contributed to post-war Britain's reconstruction. The arithmetic of war is cold, but the human impact is profound. One moment of creative desperation in a Burmese jungle in February 1944 rippled forward through generations. The final irony is how the tactic was perceived decades later. What seemed stupid in the moment, waving empty helmets at trained killers, was recognized in hindsight as brilliant asymmetric thinking. The recognition that soldiers closest to problems often develop the best solutions. The understanding that improvisation beats rigid doctrine when circumstances demand adaptation. These lessons, learned in mud and blood, became foundational principles of modern military thinking. Tommy Whitaker never saw himself as a hero or innovator. He saw himself as a carpenter who joined up when his country needed him, did what seemed necessary to keep his mates alive, and returned home as soon as possible to resume ordinary life. That perspective, pragmatic, humble, focused on practical solutions rather than glory, was itself quintessentially British. The nation that produced Tommy produced millions like him, ordinary people who did extraordinary things when required, then returned to ordinariness without fuss or expectation of recognition. The empty helmets that broke a siege in Burma became symbols of something larger. The power of human ingenuity under pressure, the value of empowering individuals to solve problems, and the truth that wars are won not just by grand strategy, but by countless small innovations made by people whose names history usually forgets. Tommy's name was remembered, preserved in military records and historical studies. But he represented thousands who improvised, adapted and survived through cleverness and courage that never made official reports. The British Army's Burma campaign remains one of the most underappreciated victories of World War II, overshadowed by European operations. Yet it demonstrated the British soldier at his best, resilient, adaptable, capable of maintaining offensive spirit through horrific conditions. Tommy Whitaker's helmet trick was one thread in that larger tapestry, a moment when individual initiative changed tactical reality, when a carpenter's perspective on problem-solving proved more valuable than formal military training, when the stupid idea became the brilliant solution. That's the legacy, not just the tactic, but the principle that innovation and courage can emerge from anywhere, that ordinary people contain extraordinary capability, and that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. If you found Tommy Whitaker's story as remarkable as we did, please subscribe to our channel for more untold tales of British courage and ingenuity during World War II. These stories deserve to be remembered. The ordinary men and women who did extraordinary things. Leave a comment below. What do you think was the most brilliant tactical innovation of the war? Share this video with anyone interested in military history. Together, we'll ensure these heroes are never forgotten. Until next time, keep calm and carry on.